You think you've seen enough betrayal in this world? Then sit down, take a breath, and get ready. Because this story will shake your sense of justice, the way you see trust, and maybe even your own decisions. Picture yourself serving your country, deep in a war zone, your life hanging by a thread, and suddenly realizing that while you're fighting for everyone else, someone back home is silently digging your grave. Not through rumors, not through email, but through an Instagram story. And it wasn't just any story. In just 15 seconds, his wife, with a practiced smile and a new boyfriend by her side, announced the end of their marriage, thanking him for 13 years of lessons, as if she were celebrating an anniversary. All the while, Michael, an army sergeant, was barely able to maintain a connection from the military base where he was stationed. No conversation, no respect, just a public display. And you still think emotional betrayal is the worst that can happen? But what they didn't know is that they were messing with the wrong man. Because some people break, and some rebuild. Michael didn't yell, didn't chase. He watched, and in silence he planned their downfall. What started as betrayal turned into a federal scandal. And if you think that's an exaggeration, wait until you find out what was behind that story, and how he turned his pain into ammunition for something much bigger. If you've ever been betrayed, deceived, or underestimated, this story is going to show you something no one tells you. The real problem isn't getting knocked down. The real mistake is getting up the same. Because Michael did get up, but he came back different. He came back with a plan. He came back with justice. He came back with purpose. And those who thought they were winning with a cheap shot had no idea they just created their worst nightmare. A wounded man who had become fully aware of his own power. And now, you're going to understand why this story isn't just about pain. It's about starting over, about emotional intelligence, about flipping the script without getting your hands dirty. And more importantly, it's about turning betrayal into transformation. Are you ready to see this up close? Some things, even when you think you're emotionally prepared, hit like a punch to the gut. And that's exactly how Michael felt when he saw that story. A 15-second video. 15 seconds that erased 13 years of life. Ashley, his wife, smiling next to a new guy, as if their entire life together was a chapter she decided to close without notice. No fight, no letter, no goodbye, just a caption saying grateful for the lessons and ready for a new chapter. Cold, you could call it that. But the worst was still to come. Now think about this. A man serving his country in a war zone, his life hanging by a thread, watching everything he built go up in smoke with a single tap on a screen. This isn't just emotional betrayal. It's strategic cowardice. And the most painful part is realizing that while he was out there saving lives, someone across the world was plotting against his. It's like coming home after a storm hoping for shelter, and finding the door locked. This kind of blow isn't just personal. It echoes in your soul. Michael's story isn't unique, sadly. In the digital age, the end of a marriage can come with a filter and background music. It's like pain now has to compete with likes. And as absurd as it sounds, this is becoming normal. Stories, posts, live streams, everything's become a stage for decisions that used to be private. And when you mix vanity with betrayal, the damage isn't just emotional, it's public, shareable, viral. Some people say it's overreacting to care so much about social media. But the truth is, they've become emotional weapons. In the wrong hands, they destroy reputations, marriages, even someone's sense of identity. Michael learned the hard way that while he was fighting for his country, someone was fighting for engagement. What was supposed to be his home became the backdrop of someone else's romance. What used to be partnership became content. That says a lot about the world we live in, and even more about who's really on your side. But let's be clear, it's not just about the end of a relationship, it's about how it ended. Because deep down, everyone deserves dignity, even in pain. Ending things through a story is like ripping off a bandage in front of an audience. And let's be real. If someone's willing to expose something that intimate, imagine what else they're capable of hiding. That thought started circling Michael's mind. And it's what sparked something much bigger. Pain, though sharp, transforms when you face it with awareness. In that moment, Michael could have acted on impulse, but he didn't. He felt it. He suffered. But he also thought. And thinking in that kind of moment is an act of courage, because instead of drowning in resentment, he took the first step toward something deeper, understanding what was really behind all that theater. And it was in that silence, in that space between the collapse and the reaction, that something began to form. It's exactly in that space, between anger and reason, where strategy is born. And Michael, even shaken, knew that some wars aren't won by shouting, but by patience. That story might have been the last straw, but he quickly realized that video was just the tip of the iceberg. Something didn't smell right, and when your heart starts to suspect and your mind decides to investigate, everything starts to change. What separates the naive from the strategist isn't the absence of pain, it's how he prepares for it. Michael could feel something was off. Ashley wasn't responding with the same energy anymore. Video calls were getting shorter. Even her expression seemed distant, even through the screen. But instead of confronting her in desperation, he chose a path that few have the composure to take: preparation. Because not everyone who smiles is really on your side, and he knew that well. Opening a separate bank account was just the beginning. Michael knew that in battles, military or emotional, supplies are survival. He stored important documents, backed up records, reorganized his life with surgical precision. He understood that protection isn't just a bulletproof vest. Sometimes, it's a well-thought-out financial plan. And if you don't have one yet, start now. Protect yourself with an emergency fund. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Even while hurting, Michael showed a level of emotional intelligence that few people master. It wasn't about being cold. It was about self-control. Feeling the hit but keeping your footing. That's the kind of posture that turns victims into leaders. While many would have smashed things or sent raging voice messages, he chose to watch. And that strategic silence, as you'll see later, is what changed everything. A lot of people confuse preparation with paranoia. But there's a massive difference. The paranoid suspects everything. The strategist recognizes patterns. Michael knew his routine had changed. And more than that, he realized her behavior followed a script. Yes, people leave trails. Small inconsistencies, slips in conversation, sudden absences. All of it landed on his radar. And instead of jumping to conclusions, he took notes. If you think love means letting your guard all the way down, think again. Love does mean trust, but trust doesn't mean handing everything over to chance. It means being smart in case things go south. Michael did just that. And that applies to any relationship. Keep your accounts organized, protect your digital identity, keep your assets in order. After all, love might be blind, but your social security number doesn't have to be. That preparation didn't take away the pain he felt, but it kept him from falling apart. And that makes all the difference, because when chaos comes knocking, the ones with structure don't panic. They act. Michael wasn't waiting for an attack, but he wasn't defenseless either. And that put him in a position of strength even when everything collapsed. Knowing you've got the basics under control gives you room to breathe. And it was with that breath that he took a deep inhale and did nothing, at least nothing visible. Because behind that silence, behind every controlled breath, a private investigation was taking shape, a hidden mission. And as we'll soon see, this choice to observe instead of react on impulse is what led him to uncover far more than he expected. Silence, when used right, becomes a powerful weapon. Instead of reacting with rage, Michael chose the rarest and most effective route: patient observation. He knew that the quieter he stayed, the easier it would be to see who was really moving in the shadows. And that's how he launched his counterattack, by staying quiet. Because in many wars, the first one to speak is the first one to lose. And Michael wanted to win, not vent. Still stationed at the base between one patrol and the next, he would discreetly access the security system of his own house, thousands of miles away. What he saw was the kind of scene nobody wants to witness. Chad, his wife's new boyfriend, walking around in his underwear through the living room, drinking coffee from his favorite mug, the one with his unit's crest. To make it worse, he was wearing Michael's old Seahawks hoodie from college. It was like the guy had stepped into his life, inside his own house. Anyone who's ever had something stolen knows. What hurts isn't just the loss. It's the audacity, the invasion of your space, the theft of something that was yours. Michael realized this wasn't just a cheating situation. It was an invasion, a complete disrespect for everything he'd built. And every image, every frame from the security cameras, felt like a piece of a filthy puzzle. But instead of acting on emotion, he collected. And here's the thing. Collecting evidence is very different from making a scene. Michael understood that he needed to build a case. He gathered dates, timestamps, door entries, saved screenshots, cross-referenced Ashley's words with Chad's movements. He started drawing up a map of inconsistencies, a step most people skip, but one that's essential if you want real justice, not just momentary relief. Because the one who holds the proof holds the power. He didn't tell anyone at first, not even his father, not even his fellow soldiers. He carried that secret like it was part of the mission. That's hard, but it's smart. Because when you're dealing with manipulative people, any leak can become a distraction. Michael didn't want to alert the enemy. He'd rather let them get comfortable until they expose themselves through their own actions. Like a fisherman who leaves the bait still until the fish bites. Here comes a crucial lesson. The loudest person isn't always the strongest. There's quiet strength in those who observe without being noticed. While Chad felt like king of the house, and Ashley lived her illusion of freedom, Michael kept preparing. His silence was disguised action, pure strategy. And that, my friend, applies to life. Instead of screaming in the middle of the fire, sometimes it's better to breathe and listen. The world talks a lot, but it reveals everything to the one who listens deeply. And in that deep listening, he noticed something strange in the house documents. Some papers were out of place, others just missing. That's when his intuition went full alert. Maybe this wasn't just emotional betrayal. What started with an Instagram story was starting to smell like a financial scam. When something doesn't sit right in your gut, trust that sooner or later, the paperwork will catch up to it. And that's exactly what happened. Michael, already used to dealing with complex operations, began reviewing old house documents and realized something was seriously wrong. There were papers he'd never signed. Worse, there were documents with his signature that he'd never seen before. Forged signature, loan approved, and the value? $792,000. That's when he decided to call Brian, his childhood friend, now a lawyer. I need you to look over some paperwork with me, but take your time, because if this is what I think it is, and it was. Brian confirmed. The refinancing request had been submitted using a forged signature. And more than that, Chad had been added as a co-signer. In other words, they were making Michael the involuntary guarantor for the new couple. This wasn't just fraud. It was legal mockery. But as a man who had discipline in his blood, Michael held back from acting in the heat of the moment. He knew that with proper legal evidence, the whole game would change. So instead of trying to handle it through shouting or threatening texts, he and Brian started building a case. They organized financing dates, pulled IP logs, traced the email accounts involved, and mapped out the financial activity. The truth, as always, was there. It just needed the right thread to be pulled. And when you pull the right thread, the whole thing starts to unravel. Chad wasn't just some opportunistic boyfriend. He had a history of pulling similar scams, always targeting women going through divorce or crisis. A clear pattern, and a realtor named Daniel popped up in the paperwork. Coincidence? Not at all. It was a web. And Ashley, at best, had turned a blind eye. At worst, she was fully involved. It's amazing how the masks come off when you're looking through the right lens. And even more shocking is realizing just how many of these scams are propped up by the blind trust of people who never ask questions. Michael began to see he wasn't the only one. Brian dug up other similar cases, different names, same tactics. The co-signer loan scam was more common than people think. That's when Michael's story stopped being just personal and started turning into something bigger. He didn't just want to get his money back. He wanted to stop others from falling into the same trap. And with that mission in mind, he decided to take it all to the FBI. He brought in the documents, handed over copies of the surveillance videos, printed out suspicious messages, and made sure to highlight every single inconsistency. And as the agents started digging deeper, Michael realized he'd touched something much bigger. What was supposed to be just a path to rebuild his own life was now becoming a federal investigation. And as he well knew from previous missions, when you pull on the edge of a fraud network, you better be ready. With every new detail that came to light, the story stopped being just an isolated case and started looking like something far more sophisticated. The realtor Daniel, originally just a side character, quickly revealed himself to be a central figure in a string of scams executed with almost surgical precision. He wasn't just helping sell fraudulently refinanced homes, he was recruiting accomplices, usually lovers inserted into people's lives just like Chad. That's when Michael realized he wasn't just the victim of betrayal, he was a witness to a large-scale criminal operation. Based on the evidence Michael provided, the FBI quickly recognized that this case could be the key to dismantling a network operating across multiple states. The scams followed a pattern. Target deployed military members or people going through divorce, forge their signatures on loans, and resell the properties through crooked realtors. It was like an auction of destroyed lives. And by exposing all of it, Michael went from betrayed husband to a central piece in the investigation. His initial silence was now bearing fruit. Big ones. As testimonies were cross-checked, other names began to surface. Victims of similar scams were found, all with similar profiles. Deployed soldiers, shared accounts, spouses who suddenly moved on out of nowhere. The connections started coming together. What once looked like coincidence was now clear as a modus operandi. Daniel and Chad had records. But Ashley wasn't just an accomplice. She was the link, the bridge between two worlds. And she was going to pay for it. The most symbolic moment of this entire shift happened on a Tuesday morning. Michael got the call. "We've got enough. The operation's a go." The FBI conducted simultaneous raids across 3 states. Chad was arrested leaving a luxury gym. Daniel was caught at his office, still holding files with forged data from other military families. Michael's house, the very place where the betrayal had happened, was now officially classified as a primary piece of evidence in the case. The irony wasn't lost on him. The place where everything fell apart had now become the turning point. And this is where most people would ask, what about Ashley? She tried to plead her case, claimed she didn't know anything, that Chad manipulated her, that Daniel was just a trusted realtor. But the evidence told another story. And as the pressure closed in, she did what many do when the mask slips. She negotiated, agreed to return the $212,740. She'd skimmed off the refinancing, waived all rights to the house and to Michael's military pension. She knew there was no way out. The most surprising part was how calmly Michael handled it all. No yelling, no chaos, just justice. He knew that at that point there was no room left for emotional outbursts. His mission now was to protect others, and that meant keeping a clear head. He understood that behind every story like his there were at least a dozen more unfolding in silence, without security cameras or a lawyer friend to help. And that drove him more than any thirst for revenge ever could. And that's exactly why he made a rare decision: to speak out publicly. He shared his story, offered his experience as a case study to prevent future scams, and committed himself to justice. Because everything he had uncovered so far was just the beginning. And the next phase would demand even more courage. Justice, when done right, doesn't have to make noise, it makes history. And the arrest of Chad and Daniel wasn't just a personal win for Michael. It marked the start of collective accountability. They weren't dragged away in front of cameras, they didn't cry in court. They were taken down with cold precision, like men who already knew their time was up. Michael didn't celebrate. He just breathed. Because for someone who's lived through real war, watching the system work is relief enough. Ashley, on the other hand, fell into the very trap she helped set. She tried to paint herself as a victim, but the data spoke louder. Her financial activity matched the timeline of the scam. Her messages with Daniel proved she was aware of the plan. And those archived emails, the ones she thought were deleted, showed she'd known about the fraud from the start. Still, in a survival move, she agreed to cooperate. And sometimes justice needs those cracks to dig deeper. In exchange for her cooperation, Ashley returned the $212,640, and publicly renounced all rights to the house and symbolically to Michael's military pension. It was like tearing up the last thread that still connected them. But more than that, it was a declaration. She would no longer have any power over his life. A cycle had ended, and the freedom Michael had always fought for in combat now showed up in the form of emotional and financial autonomy. It's interesting how the fall of a con artist doesn't happen all at once. First comes the shock, then isolation, and finally, accountability. Legal, social, moral. Chad was convicted of federal fraud. Daniel, for criminal conspiracy and money laundering. Both temporarily lost civil rights and were ordered to pay restitution to the victims. The system, when fed with real evidence, works. But it takes courage. And that's exactly what Michael brought to the table. He testified at hearings, sat in meetings with investigators, and even gave a talk to a group of officers on how to protect assets in vulnerable relationships. The man who had once been betrayed in front of the world was now teaching others how to guard themselves. And look how life turns, from the silence of pain to the microphone of prevention. What used to be shame turned into authority. What used to be a wound became a tool. Don't think it was easy. There were sleepless nights, heavy memories, even suspicious looks from people who should have had his back. But he kept going. Because once you realize you're doing something bigger than yourself, strength shows up. Michael wasn't looking for revenge. He wanted to turn the mud into a bridge. And he did. He inspired changes to protocols, helped other service members create protective clauses, and guided victims on how to reclaim their rights. But there was still something he had to face. Something that couldn't be resolved in court or filed in a police report. An internal void. That question every betrayed person ends up asking themselves, now what? Who am I after all this? And it's in the search for that renewed identity that the next chapter of the story begins. Most people, when betrayed, fantasize about revenge. They dream of their betrayer's downfall, public humiliation, that emotional reward of watching the one who hurt them get hurt too. But Michael quickly understood that revenge is a bottomless pit. You keep digging until you fall in. That's why he chose a less popular but far more powerful path. He wanted justice, not just for himself but for everyone who might fall into the same trap. Alongside the investigators, Michael began to understand the true scope of the damage. There were cases worse than his. Whole families destroyed, children affected, veterans left homeless. And he knew that if he had reacted out of impulse, all of that would have stayed buried. It was because he kept his cool that he was able to do something rare, be useful, even in the middle of pain. And the reward he got wasn't money. It was purpose, something no dollar can buy. One of the most powerful moments during this phase came during a closed talk organized by the Army. Michael shared his story with a group of young soldiers about to deploy overseas. He spoke about contracts, about trust, about how even someone you love can be seduced by greed. The room fell silent. When he finished, one of the soldiers raised his hand and said, "You saved my life before I was even in danger." That's when Michael realized the true impact of what he'd done. Justice, at that point, took on a new form. It wasn't just about locking up the guilty. It was about waking up the innocent. It was about teaching prevention where there had only been illusion. Michael wrote articles, joined seminars, and helped launch a small support group for military members going through divorce. It was his way of turning trauma into a tool. And if you've ever been betrayed, you know what I mean. When you find a way to help someone with your pain, it changes color. And no, he didn't kid himself. He knew the justice system has flaws. Not every scammer pays what they should, not every victim is heard the way they deserve. But he did his part, and that was enough. It's like planting a tree knowing you might never sit under its shade, but someone else will. And that, believe it or not, strengthens you. Because the feeling of doing the right thing doesn't go away. It stays, grows in silence, heals from the inside out. One of the most symbolic moments came when he received a handwritten letter. It was from a military wife. She had narrowly avoided a similar scam, and only managed to do so because she saw an interview with Michael. In the letter she wrote, "You gave me a voice, you gave me time, you gave me a way out." He kept that letter in the same box where he stored his war medals, because to him that was the greatest victory of all. But even with all that impact, there was something inside him still calling for a pause, a need to retreat, to reconnect. Because after so much exposure, so many battles, both external and internal, Michael just wanted to begin again, not as a hero, but as a man. And that's when he made the most unexpected decision of all. After fighting wars both overseas and within, Michael chose to do something most people don't have the guts to do. Stop. Not run. Not give up. Not hide. Stop with purpose. He requested retirement from the army, stepped away from the investigations, and packed his bags. His destination? A remote cabin in the Montana mountains. It wasn't an escape. It was a return. Because after all that noise, silence had become his prayer. The cabin was simple but comforting. No fast internet. No neighbors nearby. But it had what he needed most: peace. And it was in that peace that he started to rebuild himself. He planted, cooked, wrote, read old philosophy books, even started drafting his memoirs. A man who had spent his life fighting threats was now learning how to take care of himself. One afternoon, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, he saw the mailman approaching. Another letter, handwritten again, this time from a different military wife. She explained how, thanks to his story, she was able to protect her husband's assets just in time. She said she felt supported, even though they had never met. And she ended with a simple but powerful sentence. You saved families without ever leaving your house. The beauty of it all is, he never sought recognition. It was never about fame or even revenge. It was about truth, about using his own pain as a path for those still trapped in darkness. And that's the kind of legacy that doesn't need a spotlight. Just one transformed life is enough to make it all worth it. It's like lighting a candle in a dark room. It might not illuminate the whole world, but it changes the space you're in completely. In the months that followed, Michael kept writing. Sometimes just loose thoughts. Other times, detailed accounts of everything he had lived. He thought about turning it all into a book, but there was no rush. Because now he understood that the best stories aren't born from trauma, they're born from healing. And he was in that process. Little by little, he started feeling joy in the small things again. A morning walk, the sound of branches in the wind, the unexpected visit of a deer crossing the yard. It was like life was saying, I'm still here, Michael. And for the first time in a long while, he could say back, so am I. And there, in the heart of Montana, eyes fixed on the horizon, he realized something simple but powerful. War didn't define him. Betrayal didn't destroy him. And justice didn't complete him. He had won, not by taking others down, but by standing back up. Now tell me, what would you do if you were in Michael's shoes? Would you have lost your mind? Disappeared? Taken justice into your own hands? Because the truth is, most people can't handle being betrayed and end up betraying themselves. But he chose differently. And that difference is right there, staring you in the face. When you choose strategy over impulse, even the ugliest pain can become the fuel that changes your life, and maybe someone else's too. So are you going to keep handing your heart and your future over to the wrong hands? Or are you finally going to learn how to protect what you've built? Are you going to wait to be knocked down before you start planning? Or will you use this story as your wake-up call? The betrayal Michael went through hurt, but what he did with that pain changed everything. And if he did it, so can you, as long as you have the courage to do things differently. How many times have you gone through something like this and stayed quiet? How many times have you felt used, lied to, discarded, and still did nothing? It's time to flip the switch, to stop settling for emotional, financial, or moral scraps. You deserve more. And here's the best part. You can start now. Real change doesn't come from the outside. It starts the moment everything collapses, and you choose not to go down with it. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it shook something loose inside you, leave a comment below and tell me, what part hit you the hardest? I want to know. And more than that, I want you to share this video with someone who needs to hear it right now, because there are a lot of people living through the same hell and thinking they're alone, and you might be the bridge that saves someone from the edge. And if you want to keep learning how to turn pain into power, loss into strategy, and betrayal into freedom, hit that subscribe button now. Turn on notifications Here, every story is a warning, every story is a mirror, and every video is one more step toward your own rebuilding.